Welcome, everybody. This is the Evidence for Evolution lecture. When we talk about evidence that supports the theory of evolution, there are a lot of different ways that we get that evidence. And some of them include the fossil record, which shows change over time, the anatomical record. So when we say anatomical, we're talking about our body, anatomy, or anatomy of other organisms. And we compare body structures. We're going to talk about homology and vestigial structures, embryology and development. Embryology is a study of embryos or fertilized eggs and fetuses as they develop. The molecular record, so that would be comparing proteins and DNA sequences. And then we also can see artificial selection, which is human-caused evolution. And when you think of artificial selection, the most well-known example of that would be dogs. Homologous structures are an example of the anatomical record. And they are structures that came from the same origin. The prefix homo means the same, and the suffix logos means information. So here you have a picture in the bottom right corner of a human's hand, the cat's paw, the whale's flipper, and the bat's wing. And all three of them have the same bone structure on the inside. One bone, two bones, many bones, digits. And this one bone, two bone, many bone pattern can be found amongst lots of different organisms. They have the same development in embryo also, but they can have very different functions on the outside. Having the same structure on the inside, though, is evidence of a common ancestor. So we call this divergent evolution. And to diverge means you start at the same location and then you start going off in different directions. So we're starting from a common ancestor and we're splitting into different directions to do different functions with the same bone structure. So the bat uses their bone structure in their wing for flight, and the whale would use it for swimming. And then a cat would use it for walking on, and a human's hand, we would use it for grasping and building and writing and everything else. So we all have very different functions, but that same pattern. We have the humerus, the radius and the ulna, the carpals, and the phalanges here. This slide here can show you analogous structures. The prefix "an" or "ana" is not or non. We've talked about the prefix "a" meaning not or non, and it's not the same information. It is different information. They look the same on the outside. You have a bird's wings here and the wings of a dragonfly. They have the same function. They're both used for flight, but structurally, the development on the inside, it's extremely different. A bird's wings are going to be more, have the same bone structure or similar bone structure to our arm, and an insect has a completely different development pattern for its wings. So they have a different origin, and there is no evolutionary relationship with the analogous structures. So analogous structures are not evidence of a common ancestor between these two. So here you have two organisms, and you need to decide, are they analogous or homologous? You have a dolphin over here on the left and the fish over here on the right. What we know about them is that the dolphin is an aquatic mammal and the fish is an aquatic vertebrate. They are both adapted to life in the sea, but they are not closely related. Do you think that is the description of analogous body structures with their fins and their streamlined body shape, or homologous? Hopefully you chose analogous. Dolphins have a similar bone structure in their flipper to the whale and more like our arm. They are very similar in appearance to a fish because they evolved to have the same function of being streamlined in the water to be a fast swimmer. So they came up with a similar solution to a similar problem, but from very different ancestry. When that occurs, we call that convergent evolution. Analogous structures are evidence of convergent evolution. Organisms evolve similar solutions to similar problems. These three organisms, you have the dragonfly, the hawk here, and the bat, all have wings. They can all fly, but they all have very different bone structure and development. That is not evidence of a recent common ancestor. Convergent evolution means you're converging on something, you're coming together. So you're starting at two very separate starting points and evolving a similar solution to a similar problem. The molecular record is another place that we can see evidence of evolution. And this is an article from the scientific journal Nature about the chimpanzee genome from 2005. And it talks about what data from the Genome Project can tell us about the evolution of humans. On the front page here, it reads, scientists unleashed a torrent of studies comparing the genetic coding of humans and chimpanzees on Wednesday, reporting that 96% of our DNA sequences are identical. Even more intriguingly, the other 4% appear to contain clues to how we became different from our closest relatives in the animal kingdom. We're really looking at an individual evolutionary event, and this is spectacular, said University of Washington geneticist Robert Watterson, senior author of a study in the journal Nature presenting the draft of the chimpanzee genome. When we were in the DNA unit, we talked about the fact that they were trying to the Genome Project was to read all of the DNA of a human and sequence the A's, G's, C's, and T's and figure out what it said and what they did, what all that information was for. And after we got the information for a human, we can start comparing it to all different organisms. And the chimpanzee was one of those that we would compare to. Great apes, chimpanzees, gorilla, and orangutans all have 48 chromosomes. However, humans have only 46. Means there are 2 chromosomes that are missing, or 1 pair of chromosomes that are missing in humans that chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, our closest living relative, all have. So when scientists were studying this, they were asking questions. They noticed there was a change in chromosome number, and they wanted to know if the organisms share a common ancestor, then is there evidence in the genome for this change in chromosome number? So they set out to test it, and they had 2 testable predictions. One, that if the common ancestor had 48 chromosomes, so if the common ancestor of both the great apes and of humans had 48 chromosomes, or 24 pairs, then humans carry a fused chromosome, or 1 chromosome that joined, or there were 2 of them joined and became 1, some sort of evidence of a fused chromosome. Or if the common ancestor had 46 chromosomes, or 23 pairs like humans, then apes would carry a split chromosome, or one that divided and became 2. And chromosomes have a basic structure. They have telomeres at the ends of them and a centromere in the center. And that is the chromosome structure for all of them. All of them end with the telomeres and have a centromere in the middle. When they're duplicated and they look like X's before cell division, then they're joined together at that centromere. If you had head-to-head fusion of 2 chromosomes, then you'd have this double telomere in the center and 2 centromeres on that chromosome, and then telomeres at both ends. That would be evidence of 2 separate chromosomes having connected end to end and fused together. And in humans, you can find that exact thing. Chromosome number 2 in humans has this double telomere sequence, has one active centromere, and evidence of a deteriorated inactive centromere. Because the chromosome only needs one, once it fused, one of them started to deteriorate and became inactive. In that article in 2005, it showed that human chromosome number 2 shows the exact point at which the fusion took place. It says chromosome 2 is unique in the human lineage of evolution, having emerged as a result of head-to-head fusion of 2 chromosomes that remain separate in other primates. The precise fusion site has been located, and our analysis confirmed the presence of multiple subtelomeric duplications to the chromosomes. During the formation of human chromosome 2, one of the 2 centromeres became inactivated and the structure quickly deteriorated. I know that there are a lot of numbers and supplements and references to figures, which can make reading a scientific journal very confusing. So in your notes, I highlighted the portions that I read to you that are the main gist of that article. So focus on just those highlighted portions. If you want to find the entire article, it is cited right here. Fossil record is another example of evidence for evolution. And a fossil is defined as any evidence of an organism that lived long ago. And scientists have used the fossil record to construct a history of life on Earth. Although there is not a complete record of ancient life for the past 3.5 billion years, because not everything turns into a fossil, a great deal of modern knowledge about the history of life comes from the fossil record. I have 2 different images here for you to show how we read the fossil record. First, when you're looking in rock layers, you know that the oldest rock layers are on the bottom, with newer rock layers forming on top. So the organisms or the fossils found within those rock layers can be dated to about the same time when those rock layers formed, which is how we figure out the relative ages of the fossils, just knowing the age of the rock layer they're found in. You can see over time new species emerging within new layers, and sometimes then disappearing again as they go extinct. The fossil record of the horse, or how a horse evolved, is very complete, and it is a neat example of watching the change over time of a species. 60 million years ago, the horses had a 4-toed hoof that was well spread for walking on soft ground, and they were much smaller, and their teeth structures were different also. 40 million years ago, they had only 3 toes. Then 30 million years ago, they developed a middle toe into a hoof so they could run faster. And then they lost their toes and only had the middle toe used as a hoof about 10 million years ago. And 1 million years ago, we developed our horses kind of as we know them now, with a single hoof that runs quickly over hard ground. They're much larger and they have different bone structure in the skulls. So you can see the change in skull and the change in their limbs over time as recorded by the fossils that we have found. You can see this exhibit at the Museum of Natural History that shows the evolution of horses over time. And that's a good one to go visit. It's really neat. Embryology is another example of the anatomical record being used in support as evidence of evolution. Embryology is the study of embryos. And when we compare embryonic development of different vertebrates, it is evident that the more closely related forms continue to appear similar until later stage compared to the more distantly related forms. So the more closely related they are, the more they look alike as they're developing, So everything starts off as, fertilized egg here, all the embryos, and they all look very similar. If you just had a bunch of different types of fertilized eggs, it would be very hard to tell them apart. Then as they start to develop, you have a stage called late cleavage. Becomes a blastula and then late cleavage. And it looks just like a ball of cells. And then as the body segments develop and you have like the heart and the tail and the head area with the gill slits, and humans develop gill slits also, you can compare and see at this stage even amphibians and birds and monkeys and humans still look very similar, with amphibians looking the most different. Then limb buds start to develop. Limb buds are the little areas where your arms or legs or wings or whatever limbs you have will merge. At this point, you still cannot tell a difference between a lot of the different embryos. You're starting to be able to tell a difference with the bird and the amphibian, but the monkey and human embryos still look very, very similar. And then late fetal, this is closer to when they are going to be born or hatch. And the amphibian looks very different. The bird has developed its wings and its beak, and so it looks very different also. The monkey here has its tail still, where a human does not. We do have a tail in embryo, but it resorbs. This is embryology. We're looking at the slide for the molecular evidence. We did talk a little bit about molecular evidence when we were talking about the fusion of chromosome 2 from chimpanzees to humans. But it's not just fusion of chromosomes. We are comparing the DNA and proteins and all the genes among all organisms. All organisms on Earth have that common genetic code, from bacteria all the way up to humans. And everything is made with those A's, G's, C's, and T's. So there are a number of different genes or segments of the DNA that code for specific proteins that we can compare among organisms. The hemoglobin gene is one of those, and hemoglobin is a protein in blood. So when you compare the 146 amino acids that are in the chain of DNA that codes for making hemoglobin, you'll see that from a human to a rhesus monkey, there are only 8 differences. When we go to a mouse, there are 27 differences. A chicken has 45. A frog has 67 differences, and the lamprey has 125 differences. The more differences there are in that chain of amino acids, the less related the organism. These are questions for you to think about. What are the main evidences for evolution? And which do you feel is the strongest support of natural selection, which were what the other slides were? And then why?